Paul talks about grace. We're in an era of grace since Christ has come, and salvation is so near to all. Christ offers his life for us, his righteousness for us, his death on the cross. All we need to do to accept it, and that is the basis and foundation of our salvation throughout our entire Christian experience. But the beauty of the gospel is it doesn't leave you where Christ finds you. It changes you. It transforms you by the indwelling grace of God. That's the beauty of justification, righteousness, and sanctification. Righteousness, justification is something that's the foundation, that imputed righteousness of Christ. It will never leave us. We can never be without it. It's the basis of our assurance. But sanctification is that work that of Christ making us more and more like him, the indwelling Holy Spirit that is the work of a lifetime and will really never end until glorification at the second coming, whether it be translation or resurrection. That's the beauty of the gospel. It changes us. It transforms us. It empowers us to live a new life. In fact, as I read various evangelical understandings of the gospel, one that I really like by Darrell Bock, who's a well-known New Testament scholar, he says this: the gospel is about entry into a relationship with God in which he empowers and enables us to live in a fallen world in which there's a lot of pressure in a way that is honoring to God and faithful to him. And in that walk of that life, God is well represented of how we live. So it's a new relationship, a transforming relationship. And he says that is the core of the gospel as we see it in the early church. And that's in a presentation where he's discussing the gospel in the context of the book of Acts. So this is what you find. And one other evangelical theologian, Michael Goheen, articulates the gospel in a way that Adventists would resonate with. He says that the gospel, it's about the fulfillment of a long story that's being narrated in the Old Testament and finds its fulfillment in the New Testament, in the Christ event. He says the gospel is about the goal of cosmic history. It's about the restoration of the entire creation and all of human life, which takes place at the end of the book of Revelation, and that promise of the earth made new. What shall we say? A comprehensive nutshell, but that's a nutshell of the gospel as Seventh-day Adventists understand it, I believe, and the gospel that I have read in Adventist literature and Adventist scholarship that I've taught myself. And
more appealing to evangelicals. Sir, who is saying the gospel doesn't transform people? Again, more statements that deal with nothing I've objected to. I talk about new creation constantly. The irony of this is you didn't include being born again in your presentation. You haven't mentioned that at all anywhere because your fundamental beliefs book doesn't even mention it. I've shared my testimony with you before, how I had a radical conversion. I've never once said the gospel doesn't change people. You're not engaging with anything that this platform has said, yet this is supposed to be a response to us. At this point, there's really not much else to say in this area. I cannot make it any more clear. But then he mentioned glorification taking place at the second coming, and people will struggle with sin until then. Yeah, Dr. Lake, once again, you're out of step with Ellen White. Not only because of the entire paradigm around needing to silence Satan, and her saying that if you aren't keeping the law perfectly, it's not because you can't, but because you won't, but because, notice. Sons and daughters, again, page 9, quote, we're not to settle down expecting that a change of character will come to us by some miraculous work when Jesus shall appear in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. No, my young friends, we're judgment bound, and probation is granted to us here in this life in order that we may form characters for the future immortal life. Close quote. A change of what, Dr. Lake? Character. Consistent with what we just read in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5. Your current probationary period is for you to get to a point where you're perfectly sinless right now. Because your character is locked in after probation closes. Your character for eternity. Because nothing about your character will change at the second coming, she says. This is the condition you must be found in when the time of trouble starts, or you won't make it. Identical to Jesus, sir. It's the condition you have to be in order to silence Satan and vindicate God. Christopher, Judd, are you guys sinlessly perfect? I guess Ellen White's now considered fringe, hyper-conservative Adventists, Dr. Lake? And then like clockwork, more appealing to evangelicals to bolster Adventism. Nope, Darrell Bach and Michael Goheen don't have an extra biblical great controversy worldview that defines everything for them. Dr. Lake, you seem to only want to focus on vague generalities, the nutshell. And that since you guys agree with these generalities, the restoration of all things, intercession, restoration, that therefore validates or vindicates Adventist theology as being safe. I get that you only have a limited time, but the nutshell isn't my objection. I've been very, very clear about mine, very consistent with what they've been for over a decade, long before this platform existed, while I was a student of yours. You guys claim this was a response to me, but we're over halfway through your guys' entire response, almost finished with this section, and there hasn't been one single interaction and meaningful engagement with anything that I've said. Just a lot of assuming regarding me bringing the same criticisms everybody else has, the legalism charge, the Calvinist boogeyman, or just Arminians battle cry, and all the other standard defenses that not only miss the mark, but deal with nothing that I've said. The great controversy worldview being necessary for you guys, yet it isn't biblical. And it's not validated or proven to be biblical because you decry Calvinism. Total non sequitur. Trying to appeal to John Wesley and Arminianism does not vindicate the great controversy worldview.